Good morning, students. It is our second lecture on Havadana, and in this particular lecture, I will discuss on the theory of existentialism and how so far this particular play, that is Havadana by Girish Karnad, can be classified or can be considered as a wonderful specimen of an existential play. So, before going to this particular text, let us bring the plot synopsis and how so far the theme of existentialism can be applicable to the interpretation of this particular text. Now, you know that as I've mentioned in my last lecture, that the primary focus of this particular text, that is Havadana, it deals with two particular plots. One is to be considered as the main plot, and the second one is to be considered as the subplot or alternative plot, or you may say as a subplot to be specific. Now, what happens, that in the main plot of this particular play, we can find there are three characters, only three in number. The first one is we know that the main character, that is the female protagonist, her name is Padmini, and there are the other two characters who are number one, it is Kopila, as you know, and the second one it is Devadatta. So these are the three main characters who actually incorporate the main plot of this particular play. And what happens, that to be spoken in nutshell, you will find that Devadatta and Kopila, they are to be treated as two friends in general. Okay, and now you will find that in spite of the basic form of differences in them, why the difference is there, you will find that Devadatta is belonging to the upper strata of society. He is belonging to the group of the Brahmins. Okay, and fundamentally you will find that Devadatta is being associated with study. That means his brain is very much active, but whenever you will find that his brain is in active form, his body is not. That means his body is completely denied of any kind of physical exercise, and ultimately you will find it has become soft, you see, because in the text you will find that this particular term soft is being termed or is being used by the dolls, obviously. uh, Antithetically, the second character, that is Kopila, he is the son of Lohita. Lohita, the name has been associated with, uh, the blacksmith, obviously. So somehow the basic temperament of Kopila is being treated with a kind of a robust personality. It is not in terms of his mind, rather his body, because you will find that Kopila is the wrestler. Kopila is the out and out a physically powerful man, right? And the name Lohita, probably the term is being related with any kind of, say, loha, and that means iron. So it might be possible that actually Karnad is indicating towards the iron shaped body, or maybe the body that is made out of iron, probably. Whereas Devadatta's father's name is Vidyasagar. So you can find here the term Vidyasagar is being related with the patterns of study and the matter of wisdom to some extent, if the wisdom is possible there. And ultimately, you will find that the person is completely nurtured by such kind of study, and so deliberately Karnad is creating a kind of a, you will find that this is a kind of a antithetical representations of these two characters. I will come to these later in detail when I will discuss on the art of characterization. That then I will treat these three characters at par. What happens, that in spite of such kind of mutual relationships between Devadatta and Kopila, we find that there is another character, that is Padmini. Who is Padmini? Padmini is the character who brings such kind of problems within these lives. I cannot consider that Padmini is wholly responsible for this, because these were inherent within these characters. But somehow what happens, that Devadatta falls in love with Padmini. Kopila goes there, okay, Kopila enters the city, and Kopila finds the house of Padmini, and you will find the Padmini's father, okay, who is associated with any kind of trade and commerce, and literally what happens, the marriage has been taken place, the marriage between Devadatta and Padmini. It is quite possible, and it had become actually. uh, After that, we will find that somehow Padmini, the kind of say for example, throughout the story, you will find that Kapila is he had a kind of a secret urge, or maybe secret desire for Padmini, and so was it present in Padmini also. That means Padmini, uh, just like any other woman, Padmini desires Devadatta's knowledge, and she also desires Kapila's body, because these two have to be treated in a particular sequence. Uh, Eventually, what happens, that we find that in this particular section of the story, in this particular plot construction, you will find eventually that in a particular journey to Ujjaini, what happens, if you go through the story, you will find that somehow Devadatta is he quite remembers the particular kind of an oath that he has taken before marrying uh, Padmini, that he will sacrifice himself to Rudra. But unfortunately, here it is not possible for Devadatta to be appeared in front of Rudra, and in a particular temple of goddess Kali, he sacrificed himself. The head has been cut, you see. It's a kind of a suicide that he has been making. Uh, After that, we find that Kapila enters the particular temple and he also sacrifices himself. Then Padmini comes, and when now Padmini is pregnant, when Padmini is entering the temple, she finds the two dead bodies there. The two corpses are lying there. Okay, and when she is trying to sacrifice herself, at that very moment, goddess Kali, she in a sleepy condition, almost in a say yawning, you see, that goddess Kali appears in front of her and grants her a kind of boon, that if you make the two, that is the head and the body, and keep them intact, then I will give life, obviously. And what happens, in kind of darkness, I don't know whether Karnad is uh, focusing on darkness to signify the darkness within the mind, rather the the outer nature. It is actually to some extent representing the inner desires of Padmini. Then you will find somehow that Padmini, in that particular kind of a darkness, she mistakes the bodies and heads, and what happens, it's kind of a jumbling up. Okay, that means Kopila's body and Devdatta's head, and Devdatta's body and Kopila's head, and then the boon has been given. They came to alive, and what happens, that at this very moment, Padmini is, the most happy woman possible. Why? Because now she has got the head of Devadatta, that is the most important part, and the body of Kopila, that is the another important part. These are the two things that she desired, right? So now the problem begins. Why? You will find that somehow Kopila got changed. Kopila now urges Padmini directly, because he does possess the body of Devadatta, and ultimately it is the body that that had a kind of relationship with Padmini's body. So therefore, Kopila is in urge of Padmini now directly, and what happens, that there are multiple kind of problems arose regarding the ownership. I should use the term ownership of Padmini, because Padmini's body is an urge. The body is fundamentally very important in this particular play. So what happens, that now the question arises, and as I mentioned earlier in my last lecture, that the particular question regarding the supremacy of head over body, and that particular question comes to an end, and it has been considered that the person who does possess the head that particular body has to be considered as these persons. That means if Devadatta's head is there and Kopila's body, then this man should be treated as Devadatta. And if Kopila's body, Kopila's head was somewhere, then that particular body has to be treated as Kopila's, because the head is the supreme figure, and head actually determines everything. That is the fundamental question that it posits actually. So afterwards, we will find that in this particular plot, you will find that somehow the change has been perceptible. That means gradually what happens, that Kopila engaged himself in a kind of self-imposed exile. He comes to the forest, and Devadatta initially he tried with his robust body at this time. Devadatta is beginning some kind of exercises, but later he finds that it is not possible for me, because I am a Brahmin and I must read and study. I don't have to go to the wrestling theaters and perform in these wrestling matches. So therefore, what happens, in due course, you will find that the body is becoming changed again. That means Devadatta's, though it was Kopila's body, now it is Devadatta's. It had turned its own shape. Okay, it becomes soft, and you will find that Kopila is gradually changing into Kopila again. That means Kopila's body is now changing into Kopila again. It's because it is the temperament of Kopila that is actually in work, not the body or other things. Later you will find that Padmini comes, and somehow you will find that Kopila's Padmini comes to the forest with her child, and there is a kind of an association between themselves, and Devadatta arrives, and in a kind of a battle, there is a kind of a duel, they both kill each other, and you will find that Padmini uh, becomes the Sati. That means she sacrifices her life on the pyres of these two. But whose Sati we cannot identify. So that was the fundamental topic, that is the fundamental plot that we have found. And what happens to the child? Now the second part actually arrives. That means you will find here that this is the name of the play is Hayavadana. And ultimately we have to consider that the Hayavadana is a particular character who is present in this particular play, and the name Hayavadana, it is appearing to be Haya, that means an horse, and Vadana, it is coming from the term face. So related to a particular character whose face is just like a horse. Okay, and there is the character. Somehow you will find it is a kind of a myth that Karnad is taking, and you will find here the meat of, or the story matter that will be discussed in this text, that Hayavadana is the child of two of the characters you see. There are the references of one stallion, that means a horse, and one princess. And what happens, that the princess falls in love with the horse, and after leaving her kingdom, they lived 15 years in a close contact with each other. And later you will find that the horse is no longer remained a horse, rather it becomes a Gandharva. You know what is Gandharva? It refers to a particular character who is being associated with heaven, and he was in curse. And ultimately, the 15 years' human love changed him from a stallion or a horse into a Gandhar again. So generally, you will find that when that man, okay, return or uh, tries to return to heaven, then ultimately this lady, that is the mother of Havardhana, she denies, because she wants him to be the horse again. And now the curse is being sent to that lady. Okay, and what happens, that later on we will find that Hayavadana takes birth, and Hayavadana comes with, the horse's face and the body of a man. Okay, so somehow you will find here that Hayavadana is in search of completeness. What kind of completeness? You will find that Hayavadana wants to be a human being, a complete human being, not partial, you see. It's a kind of an incompletion that had been taken into consideration. So Hayavadana is in search of a complete human being, and it is Bhagavata who actually informs Hayavadana that if you enter the goddess, the temple of goddess Kali, the Kali will provide you the boon. Okay, and what happens, eventually we will find that Havadana goes to the temple of Kali, goddess Kali, and goddess Kali in a typical sleepy mood, in a typical ludicrous way that have been posited in this particular play, because it is somehow, you will find it is the Carnage's patterns of humor, the dark humor that she is using at this moment. And goddess Kali, before listening to the complete prayer from Havadana, what happens, that Kali gives Havadana the boon. And what happens in the meantime? You will find that when Havadana enters the stage for the second time, you will find that Havadana has actually become a horse, but without any power of name, because it is speaking. So that is the fundamental problem. Again, a kind of incompleteness is being posited here. Now, you will find the child of Padini, uh, that particular son, he remains dumb. Okay, he doesn't show any kind of emotion, he doesn't speak even. But when he watches or he sees Havadana to be entering the stage, and you will find that Havadana, it's a horse, complete horse, but without the power of name, and now it's speaking, the child actually falls in love. Okay, so the laughter, to some extent, the laughter actually was needed, and that laughter actually changed everything. What happens, towards the end of the play, you will find that somehow Hayavadana, the horse, it gradually appears to be a true horse, because the laugh of the horse, it certainly changed into the neighing of the horse, and the particular kind of an incompleteness that was present in uh, the child of Kopila, the child of Kopila, Padini, and Devadatta, that particular incompleteness has certainly been changed, because you will find that it is just throwing its dolls that were in his hand, and somehow the typical form of dumbness got gradually changed into a kind of a laughing child, you see, that is actually needed in a particular society where we are in. But somehow you will find that throughout this particular play, the matter of incompleteness is always in work. So that is in a nutshell, the fundamental two topics. You see that two sections of plot. You will find the one plot is related to the three characters, the other plot is related to with Havadana, and the story of Havadana's birth, and certainly the kind of a transformation that is taken place at the end. And here you will get the other characters like Bhagavata and other actors, and etc., etc. So all these things have been merged up in the construction of the plot of this particular play. Now the question is what I'm trying to suggest earlier, that how so far this particular text can be considered as an example of we should say an existentialist play, the theory of existentialism a little bit, you see. So let us bring with the theories of existentialism. Now, before the theory actually comes to the forefront, that means the theory of existentialism, there was a particular term that is called the existentialist philosophy. Now, what is this that is existentialist philosophy, and what does it actually signify? So let us read from M.H. Abrams' A Glossary of Literary Terms, what Abrams says about the existentialist philosophy. I'm reading a particular portion from M.H. Abrams' Glossary of Literary Terms, where M.H. Abrams is pointing towards this particular term. The philosophical premise, I'm reading, the philosophical premise is that temporality and historicality. So two terms have been incorporated. One is called the temporality, okay, and the second one is called the historicality. Yes. So somehow in these two terms, you will find that Abrams is trying to propagate the impact of time. Number one, okay, a situation in one's present that looks back to the past and anticipates the future. So it's the working of time, obviously. That means whenever you are whenever you are in present, so ultimately you have to look at your past. That means what actually makes you the present, you see. That means suppose if a person is suffering from a particular kind of a crisis, then we have to look back. Okay, and we have to identify that what are the causes, what actually made this person to be suffering in this particular thing. So and somehow what happens, what it says again, let us read again. It says that a situation in one's present that looks back to the past and anticipates the future, you see. So the future has to be set up. So in this particular play, this particular thing has to be taken in mind, is inseparably a part of each individual's beings. That means whenever you will think of any particular individual, you have to consider that how so far the past is shaping the present and how so far the present will shape the future, because it is a kind of the whole term of existence will be modeled by this past, present and future. And somehow if you have to relocate the particular kind of a problem that you are facing at this present instant, then you have to look at your past. That means from where it has sprouted. Okay, and then if you have to secure your future, you need to clarify that how so far the present can lead you towards a definite future. That is the fundamental thing. The term is existentialism. Okay, so ultimately you have to think in terms of your existence. And whenever you are thinking in terms of your existence, you will find that you have to cope up with the situations. You have to change yourself. You have to some extent, cope up with the society and the societal needs. And it is an individual versus society kind of a problem. Different kinds of problems come to the forefront. I will come to this later. So, a situation in one's present and looks back to the past and anticipates the future is inseparably a part of each individual's beings. That the process of understanding something involving an act of interpretation goes on not only in reading verbal texts but in all aspects of human experience. So, it is not simply the verbal text but the human experience that is obviously important, and that language, like temporality, pervades all aspects of experiences. So, language is also taking part in this particular scenario. Similarly, this the same thing in a nutshell. It has been taken by it is I'm reading from a dictionary of literary terms and literary theory by J.A. Cudden. You see, in Cudden's interpretation of existentialism, Cudden writes. So in philosophy, I'm reading from Cudden. Cudden says, in philosophy, the terms exist and existence denote something active rather than passive, because when you are existing, that means you have the foreknowledge about your existence. You have the knowledge about your presence. So that means it is not a kind of a passive thing, you see. That means ultimately you have to think in terms of your present. So the terms exist and existence denote something active rather than passive, and thus are closely dependent on the Latin root ex, ex. Ex means out, and stare from stare. That means to stand. That means it is the fundamental focus that you have to give ultimately. You have to stand, you have to live. And to live and to stand, you have to cope up with the situations. You have to change everything. You have to change your pattern of thinking. You have to change your life. You have to change the way you seeing at something. You are looking at something. Okay, all your thinking processes are, you see, that ultimately these have to be shaped and reshaped so that you can exist, so can you can stand. The term existentialism means pertaining to existence, you see, or in logic, predicating existence. Philosophically, it now appears or applies to a vision of the condition and existence of man. Okay, his place and function in the world and his relationship or lack of one with God. So somehow everywhere the particular theory is indicating that your capability of coping with the situations. You see, because you have to exist, and that means you have to change everything. You have to change your logic, you have to change your mind, you have to cope up with the situations. So that's why it says that it now applies to a vision of the condition and existence of man, his place and function in the world, and his relationship or lack of one with God. It is generally agreed that existentialism derives from the thinking of Kierkegaard. Obviously, that is the fundamental thing again. So there are a persons, the name of the persons are related with Kierkegaard. And obviously, there are a person like Jean-Paul Sartre, there is Beauvoir, there is Andre Malraux, there is Albert Camus, obviously, and later on we will get the names, the various names of the German existentialists, where we can find the theory of existentialism comes to the forefront. Okay, in the modern kind of texts, say for example the absurd theater, obviously and there are the ample references where these things have to come to the forefront. Everywhere you have to shape and reshape. You see, this is in the works of Samuel Beckett and obviously uh, Harold Pinter. You will find that the existential crisis is always in work. Pinter's all the plays like Dumbwaiter, Caretaker, Birthday Party, Room, all these things are actually dealing with the existential crisis. But somehow our primary focus is in Carnot. Okay, what I'm trying to suggest is existentialist view, or in this particular view, man is what he makes of himself. Okay, he is not predestined by God or by society or by biology. That means nothing can make a kind of a predestination for you. If he refuses to choose or lets other outside forces determine him, he is incontemptible. That means incontemptible. So ultimately, you have to choose your own life. You have to secure your future. You have to secure your life. It is not that the other persons, other things, other society will model it for you. The existentialists believe that man is condemned to be free. They consider life as dynamic, in a constant state of flux. A human life is not abstraction, but a series of consecutive moments. They insist on the concrete instead of the abstract, on existence itself rather than the idea of existence. So everywhere you will find that. Actually, existentialism stresses the dignity of man. Man is not a puppet in the hands of malign and inscrutable power of destiny, but he is a maker of his destiny. He is maker of his life. That means you have to shape yourself, as I mentioned. That to get the possible future, to get your optimum level of focus, you have to change your life. You have to shape your life. It believes that man can only be free through consciousness of his irrational position in the meaningless universe. The universe itself is meaningless, but ultimately you have to shape yourself. Every individual shapes his existence in his or her own way. It lays emphasis on here and now. That means the present. That is the fundamental thing. Individual freedom and choice are its main characteristics. So that's why we will find there are a number of writers who have been influenced by this particular theory. There is, you will find in Sartre and Camus, there is Albert Camus, Kafka, Rilke, Hemingway, or even in the Indian writers like Tagore, Aravind, Mulkrajanan, Rushdie, Ezekiel. Everywhere you will find the same thing is in operation. They're concerned about the meaning of human life. Everywhere they're in the search of human life and human experiences in this particular chaotic universe. Uh, Somehow, Girish Karnad has also been influenced by them, as I mentioned earlier. That this Western philosophy and literature. In my last lecture, I have mentioned that how Girish Karnad was gradually being associated with the typical Western canon of tastes, typical Western canon of theories, and the both things. You see that at one level you will find that he is being associated by the myths and theories and legends of the ancient past of India. That's why there is Katha Sarit Sagar. That's why there are the references of the ancient Mahabharata tales, as I've mentioned in case of Fire and the Rain. And at the same time, you will find that he is completely, as he is a modern man, he has been completely related with the typical Western theories and philosophies. That's why these are a kind of a fusion that have been taken places in the works of Girish Karnad somehow. His plays, say for example, Tughlaq and Havadana, these are wonderful examples of the existentialist attitude because in these two plays there are existentialist thought that deals with the problems of choice, freedom, absurdity of human behavior. Everything is in incorporation. In existentialism, we also find the dominant tone of despair. Okay, the despairing mode, anguish, alienation. Yes, this alienation, as I mentioned in our last lecture. Karnad's Fast Pe Jajati also was with the theme of responsibility. Okay, and Tughlaq deals with the philosophical problems of nature, of man, and his destiny. You will find them. So far as all the plays of Girish Karnad is concerned, you will find that all these plays are actually being dealt with this existential crisis, because in the typical modern scenario, you cannot negate these. You cannot negate the typical existential problem that are faced by the people in general. And if a particular play actually shapes the patterns of life leading, then how can it be possible that we cannot express, or we cannot find rather, such existential crisis in the characters who are present on stage? Obviously these are needed, and Karnad had done that. As I've mentioned that, now the question is how so far that particular existentialist thing being found in this particular play, Hayabadana. Where is the problem with the existences? The first thing that comes to our mind is the existential crisis within the characters, the two characters. You see that the problem arises. You see that the problem arises with the kind of a mix-up, you see, or the jumbling, when the heads and bodies have been interposed or transposed rather. You will find that who is the actual man, or who is the actual person, because you have your head and you do not possess the body of your own. So somehow the problem, the matters of incompletion, the matter of alienation begins with that particular crisis. Certainly it begins from the very front. And ultimately we have got the basic information that the person who is keeping the head, okay, that particular body has to be treated as this man's. So that's why you will find that uh, when there is Bhagavata, there is Devadatta, you will find that Devadatta's head on Kopila's body, it should be treated as Devadatta, and Kopila's head and Devadatta's bodies, it has to be treated as Kopila. Now the question is, if you think in terms of Padmini, who is now Padmini's husband? That is the fundamental question at first that I have to consider. Who is Padmini's husband? Because you will find there is Devdatta's mind, or Devdatta's head, and there is Kopila's body. Is it? Or maybe the second one, where you can get Kopila's head and Devdatta's body. So this is a question that is being posed by Girish Karnad. And you will find that somehow the problem arises. Why? Because each and every kind of, our body is controlled by our head. True. But it is our body that gives child to any other person. Right? So that's why if you consider that Kopila does not possess the head of Devadatta, but Kopila is possessing the body that gives the child to Padmini. So somehow that is a kind of an incompletion that comes to the forefront. Okay. Uh, the matter of incompletion, it's not so easy, you see, because it's a kind of a psychological anguish and psychological problems everywhere. The Kopila feels maximum, you see. Okay. And when you will find that there is a kind of an encounter between Kopila, or confrontation between Kopila and Padmini, there you will find that Kopila says these things in detail, that I cannot resist myself. Okay, because I could feel at that very moment, even he tried to console himself, console his body, control his body, and later when Padmini comes and there is a kind of a touch being exchanged between these two, the body actually remembers the past experiences. You see that Kopila says there, and I cannot forget everything, because the body knows the physical proximity that had been taken, the physical attachment that had been taken between these two bodies, the body of Devadatta that is being possessed by Kopila at this moment, and Padmini. So that's why it actually thinks in terms of the crisis, the crisis of identity. Okay, the identity crisis is at the forefront. It's a kind of a chaotic state, and which creates the crisis of identity. According to Bhagavata, the head is the sign of a man. Thus Devadatta's head becomes the rightful husband of Padmini. This solution is not permanent. The crisis of identity continues, and Devadatta's head begins to rule Kopila's body, and Padmini is once again dissatisfied. You'll find So that happens actually. Kopila too tried to forget the faceless memories, as I've mentioned earlier, of the past. But when he meets Padmini, he says, the river only feels the pool of the waterfall. There are vivid images like the river, water snakes, scarecrow, and everything is actually referring to the existential situations, obviously. Uh, Let me read from that particular section. Actually, these are the words that have been spoken by Bhagavata female chorus. You see, that when Kopila lifts her up and takes her in, that means there is a possibility of any kind of physical union between these two. You will find Bhagavata says, you cannot engrave on water, nor wound it with a knife, which is why the river has no fear of memories. And the female chorus says, the river only feels the pool of the waterfall. She giggles and tickles the rushes on the banks, then turns atop of dry leaves in the navel of the whirlpool, weaves a water snake in the net of the silver strands, in the green depths, frightens the frog on the rug of moss, sticks the and bamboo leaves, sings, tosses, leaps and sweeps on in a rush. And Bhagavata says, while the scarecrow on the bank has a face, fading on its mud-pot head, and a body torn with memories. So everywhere you will find that these are actually psychological. Okay, these are playing the role of chorus. As the female chorus, this particular term has been incorporated. And you will find that it is actually commenting on the situational crisis that they are facing. This is actually indicating the typical existential crisis that they are feeling. It is the body, the waterfall, you see, the pool of the waterfall. Do you not think it is the psychological crisis and anguish that is being taken into consideration? And these are being related with Kopila, and these are also being related with Padmini. Okay, somehow it has to carry its own thoughts, its own experiences in the form of your stream of consciousness, you see. And there is the scarecrow on the bank. It must have to be related with the society. Has a face fading on its mud pot head and body torn with memories. So somehow these have been related with the psychological anguish and temperamental aspects of these characters. This is the fundamental crisis or existentialist crisis that have been taken in view with the major three characters. But I should refer to the subplot of Hayavadana as also having some existential search of completeness. Because Hayavadana finally becomes a horse, not a man, you see. And Karnar suggests completeness in this particular form because Hayavadana wanted to be a complete human being. Rather, ironically, he had been transposed into a complete horse. So somehow Conrad is suggesting that completeness is an illusion. Completeness cannot be possible in life. Okay, it is the patterning you see in our day-to-day existence, just like the Sisyphus, the myth of Sisyphus myth. You see, each and every day we are trying to secure our future, but ultimately the future never comes. Just like Sisyphus, who is rolling the stone, you see, on the top of the mountain, and it gradually falls, and again the same action is being done again and again. That is the typical existentialism, the existentialist thing that have been taken in considerations by the myth. And the same thing is in operation. The problem in the play is that of human identity in the world, of tangled relationships. The play starts with the ceremonial worship of Lord Ganesha, ultimately. You will find the same thing is operation. What it says, he says, Bhagavata says, an elephant's head on a human body, a broken tusk, and crooked belly, whichever way you look at him, he seems the embodiment of imperfection, of incompleteness. So whenever you will treat the play at the very beginning, you will find the reference to Lord Ganesha. It is also suggesting a kind of incompletion, incompleteness, imperfection. Okay, that's why Ganesha has been treated at the very beginning. This invocation itself actually hints at the theme, that is incompleteness and maybe the existentialist crisis, maybe identity search, maybe lack of identities, or maybe any other things. Hayavadana's problem is that one of alienation as well as incompleteness. Its theme is absurd, typically absurd because it is the in Beckettian sense probably. The characters are not complete. They long to be what they are not. Devadatta's mind, Kopila's body try to realize their completeness, but their efforts fail. And Padmini too has to sacrifice herself, never finding complete fulfillment. The play suggests that human life is destined to remain incomplete and never fully contented. So the typical patterns of contentedness, satisfaction, completeness, it must not come at the end, or it hadn't come at the end. And that is the thing, you see, the typical existentialist crisis. You know, when you have gone through Macbeth, you have already tasted that, the tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow section, you see. That life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury signifying nothing. So ultimately, each and every moment we are trying to secure our future. But does it come, or is it coming that you can see? No, the future never comes. The tomorrows are never coming. Life itself is a tale told by an idiot. It is full of sound and fury but signifying nothing. This particular form of nothingness or typical form of emptiness is at the primary cause, is at the primary focus of this plays. Whether it is Pickettine plays, or maybe Pinter's plays, or maybe the writings of Ionesco, Eugene O'Neill, others, you see, or maybe Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre. In Conrad's writing, specifically in this particular play, as I mentioned, that is Hayavadana, you will find that both the main plot and subplot, they are actually focusing on such particular kind of incompletion. And to deal with the incompletion, they are dealing with the fundamental queries, the fundamental problems within the human psyche and within the characters that are present within this play. So that is the fundamental question that we have to arouse. That is the fundamental question that we have to answer. Go through the text and try to identify that what are the existentialist play sections. I haven't gone to the textual references in detail here, but ultimately, if you go through the text carefully, and you have to identify the psychological anguish and psychological problems where the incompletions being suggested. You see, not only incompletion, but identity crisis, but alienation. And whenever you will find them, try to identify the lines and try to memorize those lines. And if you try to prepare any answer on this particular topic, that is, however, Hayavadana can be treated as an existentialist play, you have to identify both the plots, you see. Main plot, that is dealing with these three characters, and subplot, where you will get Hayavadana and the child episode, you see. So, and how these two plots have been incorporated and comes to the forefront. And you have to identify the concept of completeness and what happens at the end of this play. Whether the completeness is being achieved or completeness itself is an illusion that to be, the illusion that you have feeling that yes, I will get myself being completed, but at the end you will find that it is not. It's not kind of a complete, rather it's kind of a compromise that is being made in terms of Hayavadana. Remember, the name of the play is Hayavadana. So Conrad is trying to focus mainly on this particular character. But ultimately, whenever you have to read Hayavadana, whenever you have to interpret this particular play, you have to think in terms of the other characters, the characters who are taken in the main plot. So that is the fundamental thing, and the existentialist crisis, the existentialist play, and the fundamental theories, read them, try to identify the basic features of existentialism and how so far these features can be applicable to this particular play. Okay, try to write the answer and taking, say, citations and resources from the actual text, and try to write them properly. So today up to this, thank you.